Well, we're going to start a series of sermons over the next a few weeks, talking about the minor prophets. If you're in your Bible there, at the very back of your Old Testament, the last 12 books of the Old Testament are what's considered the minor prophets, and that designation, calling them minor prophets, that goes back to at least St. Augustine, which is 300 or 400 years after Jesus. And may go back further than that. In the Old Testament, the Jewish people, after the exile, that's when all these minor prophets were kind of collected together. It's called the Trei Asar, which is the book of the 12. And they would put this Trei Asar in the very back of their Old Testament. And then we've kind of followed that form in the New Testament church. We put it in the very back of the Old Testament. And there's 12 different speakers, 12 different prophets, who are all making sort of the same message. They're trying to call Israel, the northern kingdom of Israel, and then also the southern kingdom of Judah, what altogether now is just considered Israel. They're trying to call that nation back to God. And it was kind of a rough stretch. The last 30, 40, 50 years of Israel's existence before Assyria and then Babylon came and finished them off. And a lot of the people of Israel had walked away from God. They didn't really pay attention to him anymore. And it was kind of a slow demise. And these prophets, these 12 guys, are crying out to Israel to wake up. You know, it's about to all be over. You need to straighten up. And they just never do. And so there's a certain minor key that this is all sort of played in. It's kind of sad, these prophets there at the end, and as they're making their way through. And we won't cover all 12 of them in a sermon on Sunday morning. I'm going to make a few videos for those of you who are completists, you know, the ones who have to get through the whole list. We'll make a few YouTube videos to cover some of these guys too. But today, first up is Hosea, and then we're going to look at Hosea and just talk about his message. He's the first one of the 12 in that order, and talk about what he has to say. Now, Hosea, the name, it's there at the top, is another form of Joshua. Yeshua, which we get Jesus from. It's another form of the same deal. It all kind of pulls off Yasha. That's the Hebrew word for salvation. And Hosea and Joshua and Jesus all pull off of that same root. And it's kind of, his whole name is an invitation to try to call you back to God. Try to call you back to be with him. And he's speaking during the reign of Jeroboam. And that's probably the last strong king. He wasn't a good king, but it's the last strong king that the northern kingdom had. And it's the last time that the northern kingdom was kind of a little bit on top of the world. Everything is going to start turning around for the northern kingdom after this. And God speaks to this guy, Hosea, and maybe in a vision or maybe an audible voice. And he tells him, I want you to go marry a promiscuous woman. It's kind of a strange deal, and it stands out against a lot of the teaching in Scripture, certainly. And I should point out here at the very beginning, this is not a book about how to build a great marriage. That's not what that Hosea is about, or tips, you know, marriage tips. It's not that kind of book either. He tells Hosea on purpose, go find a woman, and there's a lot of people who think that what he's saying here with this, find a prostitute. Go find somebody who has completely sold themselves out to something else and make a family with her. And for like an adulterous wife, God says, this land is guilty of unfaithfulness to the Lord. And so Hosea's whole life was going to be symbolic of what God was going through. Here you have a guy who's trying to be the right kind of guy. He's trying to be upstanding. He's trying to do the things that he's supposed to do. And he's going to tie himself to someone who's completely the other direction, and someone who's not faithful, and someone who won't stay true. And this would be kind of a scandalous thing today, for sure. If somebody was trying to live the right way and they married somebody who's on purpose, maybe an OnlyFans model or a pornographic actress or actor or something like that, married somebody who's completely going the other direction. That'd be kind of scandalous today. But in that day where men had such control, you know, of the relationship, for a man to do that, just unheard of. You know, just something that would never, ever happen. But he's what he's told to do. You go find someone, and you could certainly, because of what she's done, the choices she's made, you could treat her like a slave, but I don't want you to treat her like a slave. I want you to treat her like a wife. I want you to marry her, and I want you to love her, and I want you to build a family with her. That's the message given to Hosea. So he does, and he marries this lady, Gomer, which the name has kind of been ruined forever by the Andy Griffith Show as far as putting an image in your head. But Gomer apparently is a high attractive woman. I mean, a lot of people are interested in getting to know Gomer, and he goes to marry her, and she bears him a son. Now, it's going to mention in pretty short order, he has 3 different kids. The first one is named Jezreel, which God says, I want you to name it. There was a famous battle. I mean, you probably don't know much about it, but there was a famous battle at the time in Israel where Jehu, who was the king of Israel, wiped out all of Ahab's people, and it all happened at Jezreel, and lots of people were beheaded, really bloody, and it kind of set in motion all these bloody changes of king. It's very much Game of Thrones kind of a thing there in Israel. And so the first son's Jezreel. God said, I'm not going to forget all that stuff that happened, all that blood that was shed, all that ugliness. There's punishment coming. So this boy's name will be Jezreel, and then that'll stand for something. And then she has a daughter named Ruhamah, and again, the name means not loved, or no mercy is what it means. No pity, no love, no mercy, which is kind of a terrible name for a kid, to be honest. But again, the same message, right? Hosea's whole life is a message that I want people who meet you and meet your family to know that I've had it. And so this child is named that, and what it means is I'm not going to forgive this stuff. I mean, there's going to be sure punishment coming. And then he has a third child, a son, and he names him Lo-Ami, and it means that not mine or not my people. Now, if you have a kid, if you're married to a promiscuous person, and you have a kid and you name that kid not mine, well, I mean, it's going to make people talk, right? I mean, people are going to say some things. They're going to murmur some things behind your back. And it's possible that that's part of what's going on here, that she's already cheating on him, that she's already, and this son, he thinks it's not mine. It's not my son. So I don't want to dwell too hard on this, and I know for different ones of us it hits harder because of either our own experience or somebody that we know that we're friends with that went through it. But I mean, you can imagine what this guy's life is like, right? I mean, he's trying to do the right thing, and he's married somebody who from the very beginning has made clear that she has no real boundaries about that, has made clear, maybe she's horribly hurt and broken, or maybe she's just wild. It doesn't really tell us much about her and what she's going through. It's all written from Hosea's perspective, right? Here's a guy who could have done anything and could have been with anybody, and he chooses her. And even though she's like she is, he just keeps hanging in there, and he keeps trying to love on her, and he keeps trying to be a husband and a dad, even though in that day especially, a man would have complete control of any sort of a divorce thing, and you can imagine all his friends are telling him, move on. And eventually she leaves him. Even though he's been the kind of husband he's been, she finds somebody else, and she goes and lives with this other guy. And we'll talk about that here in a second. I want you to know the why God does this to Hosea, and it's not an easy job description for sure. But the reason why God does it to Hosea is he says, I want you to understand what I go through with you. I want you to see that, my relationship with you, but I want you to see it through this awful drama. I want you to understand what it is that I'm going through. God says, it's like I'm committed to you, but you commit adultery on me all the time. Sometimes they did it for money reasons. They tie themselves to the Assyrians or the Egyptians. Sometimes it's idolatry, where they're actually going to an idol's temple and worshiping Baal or Ashtoreth, and they're asking these different gods to do things for them. And all of the gods of that time, Baal was the most famous, most well known, was very transactional. If you go to Baal, you make a certain offering for rain. I'm going to pay this and do this, and then Baal will respond, was the thinking, with rain. Or if I want my wife to have a son or a wife to have a child, a daughter, then I'll go to Baal and I'll make this kind of offering, and then maybe she'll have that child because I made a bargain with Baal. And God says, you're going to Baal and you're going to Ashtoreth and you're making all these alliances and treaties, and instead of just coming back to me. Now, on the first, just thinking through this for us, today, because all this is and we understand drama, we understand, and sadly, again, in our life, we see sometimes marriages break apart, and we see that sort of thing happen, and we know what that looks like. But to think about God on the other side of this thing, and God saying, this is not at all the kind of relationship that I want. I'm committed, but this is not what I want. In Hosea, he says in chapter 2, verse 16, he makes a prediction. He says, what I'm looking for here is a different kind of relationship. And he says, in that day, you'll call me my husband and not my master. And I left a footnote there on my master. An NIV Bible will have a little footnote there because master could be translated different. And if you go to a different translation, I looked up the English Standard Version there. It says, you'll no longer call me my Baal. The word Baal means master, it means Lord. And so he's doing something real specific here. He says, you're treating me like one of these other idols. And again, Brian and I didn't coordinate this, but it makes me think of what Brian just said in communion. You think that if you go do certain routines, that I'll have to honor that by certain blessings. Well, God, I did this and this and this for you, therefore I expect you to do this and this and this. And it's like a business, A person might say, well, I made this commitment, or I made this offering, or I showed up this many Sundays in a row, and so I expect you to do certain things for me. And God says, that's not really the relationship that I'm looking for. He says, I'm looking for a relationship that's based more like a husband and a wife, like it's love, And while certainly a husband and wife can have a transactional relationship, right? A husband could say, well, I'm not going to serve you in this way because you've not served me in that way. Or a wife might say, well, I'm not going to give you this because you didn't give me that. While that can happen, and honestly, if you're married, almost certainly has happened in your relationship at one time or another, it's not healthy when we do that, right? It's not the best way to live. It's easy to do that, but it's not the best way to live. God says, I'm looking for a relationship that's like a husband and wife when it's working well. I mean, when you're just giving all of yourself because you love. A few verses later here in Hosea, he's going to say, I'm going to betroth you to me. Again, like a husband and wife, and I'll betroth you in righteousness and justice and in love and compassion. And he uses a word for love there that it's kind of an important word. We're going to try it together. It's the word there is hesed. So try best you can to say that with me. Hesed. Now, if you're brave, the H there at the beginning has that sound that they make sometimes in Hebrew. Hesed. So if you want to try that with me. Hesed again. Ready? 1, 2, 3. Yeah, like that. So it has that kind of a feel to it, and it's a hard word to translate into English because it means a lot of things. It's a loyal love, but there's a lot of generosity in it, right? It's a love that gives even when it doesn't get anything back. The book of Ruth uses that word hesed a lot. Ruth shows hesed to Naomi in the book of Ruth because Naomi's going back to Israel and she has nothing, and Ruth is her daughter-in-law, but Ruth's husband has died, so there's nothing anymore tying Ruth to Naomi, and Naomi's going back to Israel, and Ruth says, I'll go with you. And Naomi says to her, you've always shown hesed to me, you don't have to come back, and Ruth says, wherever you go, I'm going. And there's nothing in it for Ruth, right? I mean, there's no gain for her to do something like that. She makes this commitment to her mother-in-law because she loves her, and because she's loyal, and because she's generous, and I'm going to stick with you. And then they get in that story, that Ruth story, they get back to Israel, and Ruth meets a man named Boaz who loves her, but again, it uses that word hesed again. He loves her because he just loves her. There's nothing in it for him. I mean, it's not like she's rich. It's not like she's famous. It's not like she has a lot to offer. He just loves her. And that word hesed has all that in mind, right? It's a love that lasts. It's a love that endures. But it's a love that loves even if you don't get anything back. God uses that word hesed to talk about himself. When God's introducing himself to Moses, he says, I'm the Lord, a compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in hesed, in love, abounding in hesed and faithfulness. He says, God says, you can count on me that I'm going to be faithful no matter what, because I have a love for you that's not like any other kind of love. And now when we think about the drama here, the family here, think about a person or a couple where maybe one of them has gotten really sick, or one of them's gotten into some really financial trouble, or one of them's reputation's taken a real hit, or they've been fired. And all those vows that were made at the very beginning. I'm going to be with you for richer, for poorer, for sickness and health, forever and ever. I'm not ever going to leave. And all those vows are suddenly tested because the other person's not offering you what they were offering you at the beginning. And will you hang in there now? And when you see a love that can endure no matter what, there's a power in that, right? And when you see a couple and when we have a family, an older couple, and they love each other, and they've loved each other for years and years and years and years, and they still love each other, and they even kind of look a little bit like each other now as they've gotten older. And when you see it, like at weddings, you'll honor that, right? A lot of times at weddings, you'll get everybody out there dancing, and if you've been married for 30 years or less, sit down, or 40 years or less. And finally, there's one couple out there that have been married for 65 years or something, and they're holding on to each other just to stand up there in the middle of the floor. And it's powerful, right? I mean, it's a powerful thing when you see something like that. A love that has endured. And God says, that's the kind of love that I have, right? I'm abounding in love. I'm abounding in that hesed. Even when there's nothing in it for me, God says, I just keep coming through. And communion, which we took just a little bit ago, it reflects that. God sacrifices everything for us. Lays his life down, takes real nails in his hands and feet and thorns on his head for you, and does it before you've ever given anything back. And that's the kind of love that he wants Hosea to have. And it doesn't make sense. It's a self-sacrificing kind of love. It kind of runs counter to the way of the world. Darwin said that, he didn't say it at first, but he came to take the term survival of the fittest, that evolution demanded a survival of the fittest. And the strong will abandon the weak, and the strong will survive. But the kind of love that God's talking about runs counter to all that. It doesn't really work that way. You see a strong person make sacrifices to hold up the weak. And there's this better way to live, though sometimes it's kind of painful. And so that's what he asks Hosea to do. Go get her. And so Hosea does. In chapter 3, the Lord says, go get your wife. Even though she's loved by somebody else and she's cheated on you, go get her. And I want you to love her as the Lord loves the Israelites, even though they cheat. And so Hosea goes and gets her. He says it's kind of a weird little thing, and I don't know how much a lethek, I don't know how much of barley that is exactly, but it's an interesting verse only because she's apparently got herself in such trouble that she's more or less a slave to whoever she's with, which is why I said earlier, in that day when a man had all the control in the world, he certainly could do that, right? I mean, and this guy apparently who she's ran to has just made her a slave. She's there for sexual reasons, and maybe she can clean the house and do some work around and things like that, but she's a slave. Her life is sunk to the very bottom, and God says, go get her. So Hosea goes and gets her, but he's not got enough money to get her. It's not like he's just pulling this out of his account, so he has to barter a little. I'll give you all the money I have, and then I have some barley. And they work out a deal. And he takes her home, and he says, he tells her, you're going to be with me. And I don't want you to run away again, and I'm going to love you. And Hosea never really tells us how it works out. We don't know. I mean, it's kind of an open-ended deal. We don't know how she responds to that love. Maybe she never leaves again. Maybe they have a great life the rest of their deal, and when they're old, they look back at this awful moment and they feel different about it. Or maybe she never really totally straightens out. Maybe maybe he holds it over her head. Maybe he has a hard time. We just never know how it ends. We just know the promise there. Because God says, that's what I do. I just keep making that promise, and I want you to do it. I want you to go after her. I want you to bring her back. And all of this, right, is to illustrate in Hosea God's relationship with us. In Hosea chapter 4, God says about the Israelites, I got a charge to bring against you guys, all you Israelites. He says there's no faithfulness, there's no hesed, there's no love, there's no acknowledgement of me, right? You don't love me back like I love you. In Hosea chapter 6, he says, I want mercy, I want hesed. That mercy, love is the same word. I want mercy and not sacrifice. See, I want something different than other religions. I don't want you to come to just be in a routine, like Brian was saying during communion. I want it to mean something. But what I really want, God says, I want you to love me like I love you. I want you to care about me. And again, the same way with Hosea and Gomer, we don't know how that works out. We do know how God and the Israelites work out. They go further away before they ever turn around. And through Hosea, there will be this mention from God that maybe it's time, I don't know if I can keep doing it or not. I don't know if I can keep coming back after you when you're just going to keep turning me down over and over again. But at the end of it in Hosea, we get these verses. It says, how can I give you up? I want to talk about this more, but I had to have an eye surgery a couple of weeks ago, and it's went a little harder. I had to have an eye surgery a couple of years ago, and it's went a little harder this one than that one. And I asked my eye doctor why that was. He said, "Well, you're older now." Thanks. But it's kind of messed me up and slowed me down. And I've had a couple people ask me, will you be able to speak? How hard is that to do? And it's hard to read. I mean, I'm getting better. My eyes are getting better, and I can do it. But it is a little hard to read, and the reading is really important. And I've had 2 or 3 ask me, "Are you worried about that? Is it hard for you to do?" Not very many. Just a couple people ask me, "Are you worried?" And the preaching really for me has never been that hard. And when I got into what I do, I knew the preaching was coming, and so I was ready for most of that, and I can do that. The harder parts of my job are the parts that no one ever warned me about, and there's several different parts of that. But one part that's relevant for what we're talking about today here is every once in a while I'll get called by somebody whose marriage has fallen apart. That happens sometimes, and it turns out the other person had somebody else. And it turns out the other person had some other relationship going on, and maybe going on for some long time. And I get called sometimes there. I've got a relationship with somebody, and they go to church. And the first time it happened, it was a couple that were both leaders in the church. And I worked quite a bit with both of them in different capacities, and got this call and come over and help me out. I'm just going through a lot. And that's hard. Preaching, for the most part, is not that bad. I can do that. But those kinds of visits are really, really hard. And they don't get easier when you get more experience with it. I don't know how, like a professional counselor can do that all day long. It doesn't get easier. It stays hard. And it's the same questions. If you've ever been through it, or if you've ever known anybody who's went through it, and you've been called in like that, you know what the questions. It's the same questions. It's well, how? How could you do this to me? How could you do this to your family? What were you thinking? How could you? How much have you lied? You start calculating all the lies, and all these different things are going through the person who's hurt. They go through their thought. I'm going to do this to get even. I'm really going to crush him in the divorce. Or maybe I'm going to do this to get even. I'm going to try real hard to keep the kids, and that'll show them. Or maybe they're not thinking that way at all. Maybe it's the other way. I would do anything to get them back, And it's not well thought through stuff. You're just so hurt, and you're just so raw, and you're just so, okay, that feeling. That's what God's doing here. And it's kind of an odd picture of God. It's not really how we think about God. It's not really but how can I give you up? I mean, I know I've got every reason to do it, but how can I turn you over? God says, I'm not going to treat you like, and these two names here, Admah and Zeboim, they're mentioned in Deuteronomy as cities that were destroyed when Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. Sodom and Gomorrah have stood out in our heads. They're the first two in the bigger cities. Sodom gets a lot of mention because Lot was living there. But these were two other cities destroyed at the same time. God says, I can't treat you like them. He says, I love you. He says, the next slide, he says, my heart is changed in me. All my compassion's aroused. He says, I can't carry out my anger. I can't try to get even. I can't try to make it right because I'm God. I'm not like people. That last part's the part I want to focus on here. Hosea is God, who's not like us, trying to explain to us what he's going through. And so it's not an exact thing. And it'd be wrong to think of it as an exact thing. God can be heartbroken like we can, I think, but not like we are. Because God's still God. And if God wanted to, he could fix it all immediately because he's God. But he knows that feeling that I made all this commitment to you, but you've not stayed true to me. And it's worth thinking about, I guess, how true you stayed to God. Right? Now, Jesus, I think, was pretty influenced by Hosea. He quotes the one verse, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Jesus quotes that when he's teaching. But Jesus' most famous story kind of runs the same direction as Hosea. About a farmer who became rich and had two sons, and one son was a great worker, and the other son wanted out, didn't want to farm. And one day he comes to his dad and says, you know what, I'd like my share of everything now. And Dad gives it to him. I don't know how Dad gave it to him, if he had to go sell some property to liquidate some cash, or if he just gave him all the money he had around, or what he did to make it right. But somehow or another, the father gave the younger son what he wanted. And you think about that. One day when you pass, you'll leave behind whatever you have to your kids, but it's kind of a big deal if they come and ask for it before you go because you're still using it. But this father gives it to him. He gives it to him. And the younger son, once he gets his money together, he takes off. He runs away from Dad. And he just plays. He parties. He drinks. He sleeps around. And the money runs out. And he gets a job and he's working, but he's hungry and he's dirty. And it occurs to him that, even my father's slaves are coming out better than I am. So he decides he'll go back to his dad and he'll apologize and hope that Dad will hire him on as a slave. Will take him on and let him work there. And as he's coming back across the hill, his dad is watching the hillside. His dad probably thought the son was dead. Not heard from him for years. And he sees him. And I don't know what he sees, especially as with my eye thing here. I recognize certain people when they're coming at me because of how they walk. Before I can tell who they are, I can tell because of how they walk who they are. I can see the silhouette and I can pick out things even before. Maybe this father has that kind of moment. He sees the son coming, the son shuffling like he does, And it says Dad runs to him. And men in that age didn't run. And he runs to him, hugs him and embraces him. And the son tries to apologize, and dad cuts him off. He says, get this boy a new shoes, because slaves go barefoot. You're not a slave. The new shoes thing is significant. Get this boy new shoes. Put a ring on his finger. Clean him up a little bit. We got to have a party, because my son was dead, and now he's alive again. He was lost, and now he's found. And we don't know how that story turns out. You know, when the younger son comes back, is he a great kid from then on? Nah, man, that's the risk of love, right? Is you don't know how the story is going to end. You know how it starts, right? In that way, it's like all the different romantic comedies we see. You see Meg Ryan and Tom Hanks get together. That's how it starts. How is it in 10 years? We don't know. You hope it's just as magical as that, but it may not be, right? You just know how it starts. And that's always the risk with love, right? You'll see a young couple in love, and it's kind of heading somewhere. And so they're starting to think about, well, man, is this somebody I could see myself married to? Is this somebody that I could see myself spending the rest of my life with? And they're calculating that out in their head, and they're thinking about it. But no matter how much they calculate it, they won't know for sure, because you can't know for sure, right? I mean, you'll make all the plans, and you'll set it all up, and you'll have the wedding, and you'll stand up there together, and he'll smile at you stupidly, and that's as good as he's ever going to look the rest of his life. And you'll have to make a decision whether or not to say I do or not to him. But you don't know, because you never know. That's not how love works. That's certainly not how Hesed love works. I make the commitment to you not knowing what you'll do. And that's what God did. That's what God does. And we don't know how the story will turn out. But I would wager that some of you need to repent. I would wager that if you think about it just for a second, you'd realize maybe that you've not put God in the center spot like you should. You'd think about maybe how it has become kind of routine to you. And maybe even you'd think to yourself about certain sins that you've allowed to kind of really flourish in the garden of your life, and you'd want to make some adjustments on those things. You'd want to make some changes. And so what I wanted to do here at the end of this sermon on Hosea is to challenge you there. And we're going to pray quietly together. As when we do that, the band will come up during that, and we'll pray quietly together. And they'll get themselves set up. And then we'll play a couple of songs. And I'll have some people on both sides here, and I'll be up here in the front. And we'll give you a chance, if you want to pray about anything, to come pray. If you feel like you and God are distant, I want to give you a chance to come pray. And if you need some tips, here's 2 or 3 things that I would give you encouragement to be praying about. Whether you come forward and pray with us, or you pray there where you're at as we sing. I would encourage you to focus on God's great faithfulness. He never stops. The song we sang earlier, he never lets go, right? His love is scandalous. It's over the top. It's reckless. Because he loves us not knowing how we're going to respond. So I'd think about that first. And if you wanted to just pray about that, that'd be a great thing to pray about. You might want to pray about yourself and against that picture of his great love, and think about, am I devoted to God like I should be? You know, is God really kind of the focus point of my life? And his way, is it my way? You know, Toby mentioned camp, and the beauty of camp, getting away for a week to just focus on God. And really, even church services, it's a much smaller version of the same thing. To get away just for a moment, you know, out of the rest of the world, and just think for a second about God. It occurs to you there's a better way to live. But some of us, and me too, take shortcuts from that. And of course, the big shortcuts are the shortcuts that make us feel good or comfortable at the expense of the service we should be doing. Or the shortcuts that allow us to hold grudges, where I won't talk to certain people because I'm mad at them. Well, I don't think they like me, or whatever, and I hold on to these grudges. So I'd encourage you to pray about those things. And if none of that triggers anything in you at all, then I would encourage you to thank God for your good standing. And I don't even totally mean that sarcastically. If that's where you're at, man, awesome. Because you won't stay there, because none of us do. We're all fragile and broken. God never changes, but we do quite a bit. So I just want to give you a chance to pray about any of those things. And use today as a launching pad, right? God's love's not going to change, but my story has not totally been written yet. And I can come back to him whenever I want. And I know that when I do, I'm going to find grace and compassion, hesed, a loyal love. He's just not going to quit on me. So I don't want to quit on him. Let me pray with you.